Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of athletes, coaches, and parents to transform leaders on and off the court. And in today's episode, we got a great guest for you all today. His name is Jeff Heggie, and he is actually a former collegiate and professional rodeo rider. He also is a business owner. He's the co-founder of The Confident Athlete. And in today's episode, we talk a lot about the mental side of sports, but not only the mental side of sports, how that mental side of sports actually transitions and helps us in other aspects of our life. It's a really impactful episode, and I can't wait to share it with you all. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast, Jeff. I am thrilled to have you on today, have our conversation about the confident athlete, talking about your experience in rodeo. You're the first person with experience as an athlete in rodeo, and also just talking, coaching basketball. So welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you. I love what you're doing. And yeah, I love talking sports, and especially when it's an opportunity to help youth.
Absolutely. Yep. That's what it's all about. And, kind of diving right in, our super softball question is, what kind of impact has sports made on your life, especially your earlier life?
You bet. It's a unique situation because you had mentioned the Confident Athlete program. And that's what I tell all the athletes that come into our program is there's nothing in the program that we teach that isn't going to help you later in life as well. And I think that's the biggest thing about sports is what it does for us beyond the sport. You look at anything, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of the leadership and, managing and all those sort of things that you learn through sports and you learn from being on a team. And so I think, there's this could be the whole podcast, this question really, because, you look at discipline, you look at commitment, all of those things that are important throughout our lives are really important in sports. And it's really something that athletes learn through what they commit to on their team. And the thing about it is you learn things about, how committed are you? And what are the end results and how they impact each other. So I think a lot of that really is something that sticks with us forever. And, whether it's players, coaches, opponents, because of sports, I've created lifelong friends. I'm doing business with someone right now that we just recently in the last year have reconnected, but we played high school basketball together. And he lives in Utah now. I'm in Arizona, but we played up in Alberta together. And so I think a lot of that, and, especially when we're young and we're competitive, it's like, those are the opponents, they're the bad guys or whatever. But we did develop a lot of friendships that have turned into lifelong friendships. And I think that's another big part. And, and now at this point, it's being able to give back to the younger generations.
I love that. It is right. It could be a whole podcast, conversation around just the impact of sports. And I think, you bring up an interesting point as I hear you talking about, getting together with, someone that you played against in high school basketball. I think of something similar. Next week, I'm having someone on the podcast. I went to my rival high school, and actually he graduated even before I graduated, but because of a small area and, just like knowing each other and playing sports, he's like, yeah, let's get on the podcast. Let's talk it out together. He's doing sports complexes. So, it's just kind of funny how all of those things, kind of work. And I'm curious, since you're the first person that has come on that has, been a competitive athlete in the rodeo space. I love how some of those, if you could, share some stories specifically in rodeo that, taught you about discipline and commitment and connection.
Yeah, for sure. It's like any sport. To be successful, there has to be a lot of discipline and a lot of work that goes into it. I remember even at the point when I had started to slow down and I wasn't going to a lot of rodeos, and I hadn't actually been to any for a while. And a friend of mine called me up and he's like, hey, come to this rodeo with me. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm going to do that. And I was talking to my wife. I was on a business trip at the time and I was on the phone with her. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going to enter the rodeo next weekend. And she says, cool, that'd be really good. But remember when you would go a week or so without practicing and your timing was off? She's like, you haven't done it for 5 years. Like, yeah, you're right. And so there is, to be successful in anything we do, there is that commitment. And what are you willing to put into it to get the results that you expect out of it? Rodeo is actually a really unique event, sport, because it is something, especially you look at the event I was in, steer wrestling. And for those listening that don't know what steer wrestling is, it's you're on a horse, steer leaves the chute, you've got a guy on the horse on the right side, you're on the left side. The guy on the right side, his job is to make sure the steer runs straight. Your horse runs by and you jump off onto the horns of the steer and wrestle it to the ground, basically is what you're doing. But the cool thing about that is, one, that guy on the other side keeping that steer running straight, he plays a really important role, because if the steer doesn't run straight, you hit the ground. He's also one of your competitors. And so he's doing his best job to help you win. And, it's really cool, the camaraderie and family within a rodeo arena, because, yeah, you're all out there trying to beat each other, but you're all out there helping each other as much as you can as well. And so it's really cool that way. And again, just like I mentioned, growing up with friends in basketball and other sports, I've got a lot of friends that I'm still connected to, that whether it was in high school, whether it was in college, amateur or professional, that I'm still friends with because of the connections we made. And so it's really cool that way to be able to, create those relationships that are long lasting.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really interesting because I don't know that much about steer wrestling, to be honest. Maybe seen it a couple of times on ESPN and TV, and it looks, that's a true action sport. Like that takes a lot of, kind of guts, so to speak, and obviously, I didn't know that it was kind of, you're competing with them, but at the same time you're kind of helping people out. And I think this is kind of remind me of a previous conversation I had a while ago on the podcast. Her name's Elisa O'Mara, and that, like she's talking about basketball, right? And you kind of brought this up earlier, that it's like so much bigger than just wins and losses. It's about, kind of connecting with other coaches and sharing ideas. And after reading Pat Summitt's autobiography, she would actually she didn't always hang out with like Gino Ariema, but other, coaches that are in, the women's college basketball coaching space, and just hanging out and talking about life other than basketball too. And,
Yeah.
you mentioned some of these connections that you've made, and I know that you've had, kind of a life outside of sports as well. What can you like dive a little bit more into, some of these connections that you've made through rodeo or basketball that have helped you in other avenues of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even, I had a manufacturing company that we manufactured and sold product through Canada and the US. And it was even cool there, that connecting with people again, that, I rodeoed with you 10 years ago and I knew you were doing this. And so I wanted to support your company because I needed product or whatever. So it's cool to be able to do that. But there's also, I mean, like I said, so Travis, the guy I grew up playing basketball with up in Canada, we've recently reconnected and now we're working together, doing business together. In fact, next week we're going to be in Wichita going through some real estate deals that we're doing. And so it's really an opportunity to continue those relationships into different spheres, into business, into things outside of the sports. And, there's a lot of people that I've either played with or rodeoed with that are also coaching. And so that's always been a cool opportunity to network with them and see what they're doing and help each other. I mean, it's the whole, you don't know what you don't know. And so you're always looking to learn from one another. And so when you have those relationships, and, a cool part now is, even with the Confident Athlete program, I'm having the opportunity now with some athletes that are in there, that are in rodeo, that they're in there because their parents used to rodeo with me. And they're like, you know what? Because a lot of it, honestly, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but if I look back when I was younger as an athlete, I didn't understand the mental side of the sport. And so now they're looking at it saying, you know what? I didn't either, but my kid needs this. And so to be able to work with the athletes of people that I used to compete with has been pretty cool.
Let's dive right into the mental side of the sport. Like talking about, what you didn't know. What are some of the things that you could go back, if you could go back in time, what would be the top three, action items that you would, work on specifically if you knew what you do now when you were a rodeo athlete?
So, well, it's basically what in the Confident Athlete program, what we call our success path. And, my partner in that program, Tammy Matheny, has written a book called The Confident Athlete that basically is the outline of a lot of what's in the success path. And there's a lot of those things, I remember. So a lot of what I did through, in fact, all my sports, I was always following in my older brother's footsteps. I wanted to do what he was doing and stuff. And so that's why, I wanted to be a basketball player like him. I wanted to follow his footsteps in rodeo and stuff. I remember at one time he gave me an article, and, it was a long time ago. And it talked about visualization. That was the first time I was ever kind of introduced to the mental side of things. And it was something that I used consistently when I rodeoed. Before every time I competed, I would go through these visualization practices. And, in the success path, those are some of the things that we really emphasize and teach. And I think these are the things that would have been more useful to me to know back then, was more of the details on how to use visualization properly, but how impactful and the influence it has to look at things like your self-talk, your body language, preparation. Those are some of the key things that, when you look at sports, most of the time you're just looking at what are the physical things I need to do? How do I prepare myself physically to compete at my best? Which is important, but the mental game is just as important. And so I think that's really where I lacked when I was younger, is developing some of those mental strengths, whether it was learning the power of self-talk, learning the power of visualization, body language, because it all impacts you more than you realize.
Absolutely. And as a coach, I'm guessing, and one of, our missions here is to, kind of help pass this on, and, coaches, they may hear about it. They're like, mental training, right? Like, I know it's important, but how do I do it? And before we talk about like how the positive self-talk and kind of a lot of the exercises, I would love to learn a little bit more about how you have come to kind of, accept, because I feel like the mental side of athletics is, it's been there for a while, but like it's kind of getting hotter, right? And how did you find out about it, and how did you implement, kind of the mental side of the game when you were coaching basketball?
Well, even as a coach, it took me a long time before I really started to learn more and more about it. And even, when I think of this, one of the things I didn't know how to properly deal with as a coach was my players that dealt with their own personal mental health issues. I was more of the coach that, suck it up, get on the line, let's run it out of you. and I didn't know how to deal with some of those things. And so the whole mental game, including mental health, kind of came together. It was actually because of business. Through business and my business coaching, I was working a lot on mindset, and I was really studying, to begin with, just growth mindset, fixed mindset, and really looking at that and thinking, this is this is what I'm researching and learning about all this for business, but this is exactly what my athletes need. And so started to implement those things. And I was fortunate enough to get introduced to some really amazing people, including Tammy Matheny, who just encouraged me to continue to learn more and more about it. And, some of it, as an athlete, there's certain things that, even you might not understand the whole process of self-talk. When you're talking negatively to yourself, that it's not a good thing, right? And even with my athletes, I'd created different things that we did, when they missed a shot or something that was really impactful, and rather than hang their head, I used, I had one girl that I wanted her to do something physical. She would touch her left shoulder. I had my daughter, I had something written on the toe of her shoe. So if she ever hung her head, she saw that and clicked her out of it. But it was starting to learn how to purposely implement these things that started to really come into play, and started seeing some really cool results with the athletes I was working with, which turned into, well, first of all, a great relationship with Tammy, but then I created a program and started working with athletes, which eventually came into Tammy and I working together in the program. And, the cool thing is, like I said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. So even though I've been a professional athlete as in rodeo, and I've coached for 20 years, and, I've been studying this for so long and teaching my athletes, I learn from Tammy every day. And so it's a continual learning process for all of us.
100%. And I'd love to kind of dive in right there. And how has, a growth mindset and always wanting to and continuing to learn, like, helped you kind of, further your career? Cause I know you've had, kind of different avenues and sections of life, between business, between, being a professional in rodeo, between coaching, and obviously, parenting's probably a whole nother lane. But by what does being a lifelong learner really like mean to you, and how do you kind of like try and have that mindset every single day?
It's interesting too, because, for anyone watching this on video, you can see my library behind me. I've always been a lifelong learner. I love to study. I love to learn. And I think one of the big things about it is not only learning it, but learning how to implement what you learn. Because I remember, you look at growth mindset, fixed mindset, and you can teach it all you want, but until you're in a position to actually execute on those things and implement them in your life, you don't know how you're going to actually respond or react to it. And for an example, through COVID, I had a business that I had had for 16 years turned into a really big failure on me. We had to shut it down, and it was really hard. And as we talk about, your self-talk and stuff like that, and when you recognize the self-talk, you've got the negative self-talk, you've got to replace it with positive. In theory, that's really easy to do. But when you're dealing with, my business failed, what am I going to do with my employees, investors, all these things, it's really easy to just throw it out the window and say, okay, yeah, that's all nice, but I can't change that right now. Right. And so it's actually, how are you going to put that into practice? And so there was times I caught myself, and I think that's the biggest thing, is knowing how to recognize it, and when it happens, how are you going to respond? Because it's in fact, just to give you an example, I had a basketball player that I was working with, and we talked a lot about the negative self-talk and how you fix it and stuff. And the biggest aha he got back on a call with me after a tournament. He's like, I never thought I had an issue with this, but now I recognize it. I missed a shot and I recognize that I had these negative things going through my mind. And so it's not saying you're never going to have these negative thoughts. It's when they happen, what are you going to do? And so yeah, I had taught that a lot. I had coached a lot on it, but until I was in the situation myself, I didn't know how I was going to react or respond to it. And so it's, the learning is important, but you've got to also understand, okay, when I'm in that situation, how am I going to react or respond? Because that's all that really matters. And so that's where the education comes in handy, because if you don't even know, if you've never even addressed it, you've never even talked about negative self-talk or body language or something, you're not going to know any different. And so,
right, it's the theory, right, and learning the theory, and then the application of the theory. And that's part of kind of being a teacher, and without giving up the secret sauce of the confident athlete. I'd love for you, you kind of talked about the win, right? So understanding, like, number one, like, we have to know what is going on. We have to, number one, recognize the self thought or our self-talk and our thoughts that are driving, a lot of emotional behavior. But before that, and then after that, we have to, once we recognize it, I feel, in my opinion, and this is, for me, like I was playing basketball the other day, like for myself, training like I used to train. I caught myself just being like getting frustrated after missing shots in a row, like an athlete would. And I kind of liked doing that and putting myself in the athlete's shoes instead of, because sometimes as coaches, we can just be like, no, just do this, and recognizing how challenging it is sometimes to be like, I missed, 3 to 5 shots in a row, and I expect to make, every single one, and not to be like, because my natural cycle when I was playing, I was like, you suck, like just that's what I tell myself after a while. But I'd love for you to, kind of explain a little bit more about, some of the, and you briefly mentioned it with your daughter looking down at her shoes, just different things that can help athletes with responding to, that negative self-talk and, that aspect of the mental game.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different things you can do. Like I said, physically touching your shoulder, looking at your shoes or whatever, but everyone's got to have their own thing when they recognize it. What am I going to do? And in fact, Tammy teaches something great. She calls it win. What's important now, or what's important next? I refer to basketball a lot. So, you miss a shot. How many times do you see someone miss a shot, then they're pouting the next time down the floor, get a foul, or they mess up and it compounds. Well, you miss that shot, you're not going to take it back. So what's important now? Well, now I got to focus on defense, or now I got to focus on the next thing, right? So that's always a good thing. Affirmations or incantations are always a good thing too, because it's easier to recognize the negative self-talk than it is to replace it with something positive. And so if you have something that just out of habit, you'll say, this is what I'm going to tell myself. I'm going to repeat this in my mind just to change that thought pattern. That's definitely helpful as well. But, and everything ties in together. You look at, so I did an interview on my podcast with Tyson Durfee, who's a world champion calf roper, rodeo. And he talked about when he was younger, when he was in high school even, that he put in so much practice. And this goes to the whole preparation. He put in so much practice that he had such a high level of confidence. He would go to compete, and he felt like he deserved it more than the others because he knew he had put in the work more than anyone else had. Well, when you look at confidence, people will look at confidence as something that can be taken away or can be impacted by a bad shot or something like that, or even a bad call. How many times do you see someone lose it because a ref makes a bad call? I can guarantee you a ref's going to make a bad call. They always do. You can tell I'm a coach. And that doesn't change the years or whatever you've put into your sport. In one of my programs, I remember, dang, it's been a while. I think it was 2019. Is before Klay Thompson had his injuries and the NBA playoffs, and they were playing the Rockets, and he had 3 or 4 games that he just could not shoot. And I mean, he's a premier shooter in the league, right? And when I think it was game 3, all of a sudden in the first 5 minutes, he had more points than he had in the other 3 games combined, right? And the announcers were like, oh, Klay's back and all this. He didn't quit shooting during that little slump he had because he had put in so much preparation before that point. He knew he was an elite shooter. Maybe things weren't dropping, but it didn't take away his confidence to shoot. He knew he's put in years and years of practice. So missing some shots didn't reduce his confidence. And that's what you've got to remember. Me missing a shot, striking out, whatever sport you're playing, doesn't take away from everything that's got you to that point. And you've just got to be able to reflect on that and remember that. And remember, you know what? I deserve this. I've put in the work. I've done what it takes to get here. And next, move on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm curious for you as a basketball coach, and I'm thinking specifically because I talk about that, with my athletes. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things for young athletes to grasp is to play with the same confidence after a miss, yeah, as before the miss, as that shot. And like, especially shooting is everything is confidence, right? Like I say, shoot to drill it versus just shoot to shoot it, right? Shoot to, like, because you can shoot not to miss it, right? I can just shoot like, and try and aim it, right? It's the same thing as a pitcher, and you're like aiming your fastball. Like when you're aiming, it's over. Like you're not, kind of following through and shooting it with like that, kind of like, that little oomph at the end. And, but you also have to put in the work to do that. And I'm curious, as a basketball coach, like, what do you think, what is that work? What is that preparation? Because I wholeheartedly agree that it comes from the preparation, but like, what does that preparation really take?
I think there's a lot of things, and I actually talked about this on a social media post recently, is, when is it that a champion becomes great? Is it, talking about Tyson Durfee, was it when he won the world championship? No, he was great. That greatness happened when he decided to put in the work that was going to allow him to develop those skills. And I think that, it's a combination of the mental and physical preparation, doing what it takes. Are you going to become the best athlete in the world by going to every practice with your team? Yeah, you can become a great athlete, but to be the best, it's going to require a lot more than that. I remember listening to an interview with Michael Phelps talking about how big of a deal it was to him that one time his coach let him off early so he could go to a dance. I think it was prom or something. And it was because he was so committed to what he was doing. That was a big deal that he actually took some time off to go do that. And it's that commitment level. What are you committed to do? Are you committed to put in the practice with the team, put in and I guess I shouldn't just say practice, the intentional practice, because like you say, it's aiming versus the other things. But are you willing to put in your own practice? Are you willing to put in the conditioning, the weight training, watching film, the mental strength training, all of those things? Because you're going to get different people doing it at different levels, but it's also part of the preparation. What is your commitment to that future outcome that you want? And knowing too that, what you do this week, what you learn this week means that next week you're a different person than you were a week ago. And so how do things change? How do things adjust? What do you need to review and continue to grow that way? And knowing what you're capable of and how far you can push yourself. What a story I love to share. So one of my players, she went on to play for a junior college, and they were playing here in Arizona. So I took my team and we went and watched them play. And as a basketball coach, I condition my players good. I love to press. I love to fast break, run and gun. And so they've got to be in good shape. And I think being in good shape is as helpful mentally as it is physically. And so she told me after, she's like, "Oh, you should have seen our practice last week. I thought you ran us hard. Our coach made us do 80 something up and backs." I thought, yeah. I was like, okay, thanks for letting me know. In our next practice, we got warmed up and stuff. And I would just stop every once in a while. I was like, okay, everyone on the line, 5 up and backs. Then we get back into practice. And I'd say, okay, 3 up and backs, 6 up and backs, whatever it was, and just kept doing that. And at the end, and it was always, that our teams were always good at encouraging each other. The slower ones, everyone's pushing them to keep going, that sort of stuff. The ones that are always at the front are always who can be first and second and stuff. So they went hard the whole practice. Anyways, at the end of practice, we were huddled up, and I said, "Hey, how many up and backs do you guys think we did?" And they were all throwing out numbers. "Oh, we did a lot that practice." I said, "You did 101. They're like, "You were keeping track?" I was like, "Yeah, I knew we were doing 101 before you got here. But if I would have told you at the first of practice, we're going to do 101 up and backs, how many would have had injuries? I can't run today. I can't do that." Or, all those things. But it was the whole, and that part wasn't for the conditioning, which they thought it was for. It was for, I can do hard things. I got through that. So when you're sitting in the fourth quarter, sitting at the foul line, and you look around and your opponent is their tongues hanging on the ground, and you've still got some gas in the tank. Mentally, you've got them. And even now, I'll see some of my old athletes that I did that with. They'll be like, remember that time you made us do 101 up and backs? I mean, they're proud of what they did. Like I said, before practice, if I would have told them that, they would have been like, no way, we're not doing this. We don't want to do this. But now they look back, we did something hard, and we did, we pushed ourselves the whole time. So I think through preparation, all of those things is how you develop your mental game.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think conditioning is one of the most overlooked aspects of training when I think athletes think about training for their sport specific, right? And I remember, I made sure, because I got cut from the varsity team my junior year, and I made sure that when I came in my senior year, I was going to be in the best shape, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I was, and that's one of the reasons I made the team. Was not the most talented, but obviously I showed that I put in the work, and I think it's really important to do the little things right. Like everyone wants to work on their shooting and get better in that way, but when high school season comes around, so whenever tryouts are you really putting in the extra conditioning work that month or two before, that really is going to separate you and really is going to, because I'm definitely, like, I think we probably share similar basketball philosophies. I'm a newer coach, so I'm just kind of learning the power of the press, because I'm kind of shifting from the player coach perspective, learning the X's and O's, and, just becoming a tougher team in general. Like you have to be, especially, and in LA, it's super competitive, right? And I remember, you told me that you were taking your daughter to a team in Southern California. I'm sure was super competitive, so she had to continue to put in her work. And I'd argue now that sports are more competitive than ever because there are trainers, there is more access to information, but like I saw an Instagram post, there's a huge line for people that want to be successful, right? But there's no one in line for people that want to work to be successful.
Right. And I've seen that post. I think there should be one more line. There's that huge line that want to do it. There's a huge line that are putting in the work, but there's that other line that are putting in the intentional work, because there's a lot of athletes that they put in the hours. They're in the gym doing their thing that is away on their own time. But what are they doing? Because there's a difference between going in and shooting for an hour and going in with the Mamba mentality where you're going 100% and really putting in the drills that are going to make you better.
Right. How are you doing it? How are you doing those drills? And I'd love for you to explain, while we're talking about the how, like how the confident athlete works. And for those, parents, coaches, athletes that are listening, what do you think they would get out of it? I know you touched a little bit on it as well, but if you can expand more, because I think it's just a great opportunity for athletes to gain that mental edge that it really requires to separate yourself, especially if you're kind of on the bubble.
Yeah, for sure. So with the Confident Athlete program, what it is, originally it was completely self-directed. You get in the program and you go through it at your own pace or whatever. But some of the feedback we actually got from some parents and coaches was athletes still like some direction. And so we do have, every week they get some suggested emails that if you haven't done it yet, make sure to go through this part and whatever. But what it is the core of it is what we call the success path. And it's a membership site that, someone can sign up for. We hope they sign up throughout the duration of their athletic career. But if they sign up for a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, great, as long as they're getting something out of it and growing as an athlete. But in the success path, we go through, it begins with, the foundations of how we see the proper way of setting goals and understanding your why and figuring out what your true purpose is behind what you play for. Because honestly, there's a lot that get to the level where they're good enough athlete that they're starting to think about these things, the mental game and stuff. Are they playing for themselves still because they love it? Or are they playing for a parent's why or a coach's why or something like that? And so we go through that. We go through the whole goal setting, creating success habits and that. And then we get into the self-talk, the body language, the visualization, the preparation, a lot of those things. Now, in addition to that, there's a whole library of previous recordings we've done, but we do a monthly live training where the athletes can get on. Tammy and I train them. They can ask questions, and we can really help them there. And like I said, if they can't get on the live calls, we have the recordings. We do, because what we said at the very beginning, the things they learn as athletes are going to carry with them throughout their life. And so something that I really wanted to add in there was, we've got a module on personal development. And so personal development that might not be specific to athletics, but is going to help them somehow in their life. We have that. Then we have one of my favorite, we have so much. Then we have the resources module, where I'm always adding different things in there, whether it's from different coaches, from, Tammy's got a lot of different books that I'll read something in there and be like, this needs to be in front of our athletes, recruiting, all those different things. But then I've got an expert module in there. And in there, I've got, professional athletes, coaches, Olympic athletes, all different people that have succeeded in their sport, and interviewed them and that can help the athletes see what they need to do to get to that level. And then another thing that we've recently added is actually a parents module, because we want the parents to be more involved. Especially athletes are difficult to parent because there are things, as a parent, that you want to help them with, but most good athletes know more than you, right? And so at least they believe they do, or maybe the coach is talking something different. The thing we like about this, so I encourage my parents, if your athlete's going to the success module, go through it with them, go through the success path, listen to it, so that you can have conversations with your athlete speaking the same terms, the same language. But in the expert series, there's a lot in there. I'll tell, Todd Stottlemyre, multiple time World Series champion. We had a call with him just recently that was just outstanding. And I've told a number of parents, I'm like, go listen to that with your athlete, because you're going to have the most incredible conversations about them and their sport after listening to the things he talked about. And he talked a lot about, his dad, Todd Stottlemyre's dad, was a very renowned coach in Major League Baseball. And so, his dad's coaching for New York, he's playing for Toronto. And, he really talked a lot about the relationship with his dad and stuff like that. So it's really cool for parents to get involved that way. And there's just a ton of resources in there from these experts that have been there, that, like I said, the thing I love about it is when a parent can speak the same language with the athlete, and so they're on the same page. And I think it really brings them together and understand the goals they're trying to achieve.
I love that. That's a great opportunity, for young athletes and parents as well. I think actually it's really important for coaches to bring parents in, and that's one of the things I'm hoping to do with the group trainings, instead of kind of keeping them arm's distance. Don't worry, I'm taking care of them. Kind of to bring everyone in together. Because it's a process. And I actually just recorded an episode today where I was just, parents are actually the most important, influences on kids, whether they know it or not, and whether their kids led on to it or not.
Yeah.
They may say like, Mom, Dad, I already know, but like subconsciously they are listening and they are being influenced by that. And so having those conversations together is really important. And kind of the last question I'll ask you is like, can you share any athlete stories that, have been impacted? You shared a little bit about, the basketball player talking about his tournament, but are there any other success stories that you'd like to share that have, really got something out of, the great resources you all provide?
Yeah, it is really cool to start getting this feedback from these athletes. I had a college athlete she was going into her senior year, and she started going through the program during the summer before her senior year, and she got into basketball season, and she just made a comment that, what, I thought I had it all together. I thought I knew all these things, and understanding the whole mental game really changed my final season. It made me not only a better player, but a better teammate, better leader, and all these things. And the cool thing now is she's coaching now. To see her coach and let those things impact her players that she's coached, and has been pretty awesome. Another one is, we actually, in the expert module, we have a soccer player that Tammy had done some work with, and he shares a great story when he was playing university soccer on a visualization script that Tammy worked with him on, and how he tells the story of how, you think of some of these exercises and are they just fluff? Are they really worth it? And he says, we went through this, and it was literally, I would get into a game and it was exactly, I visualized everything, just flowed exactly. And I can share that too with the listeners. We share that visualization script that Tammy created. It's at confidentathleteprogram.com/visualization, and they can get that visualization script for free, but it's a really cool tool.
That's awesome. I mean, that sounds like there's a ton of wonderful tools, and I've got the opportunity to kind of explore through it and listen to some conversations. And now I obviously have you and Tammy on the podcast, so it's definitely, you're friends of the show, as they like to say. And I really appreciate the work you all are doing for athletes, and, because at the end of the day, we want to transform leaders on and off the court, because at the end of the day, just like me and you, we're done with sports. We get to coach and we get to give it back now. And we want, like the athlete you just got the opportunity to work with, crush it in their senior season. And then, hey, go take up a coaching role, administration role, or even if they're not in sports, just go kind of ripple effect that impact. And we're going to definitely include an affiliate link below of how you can sign up to the Confident Athlete in the show description. But how else can parents find some of those resources like Tammy's book, or reach out and connect with you, and how can they find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to jeffheggie.com, it's jeffheggie.com. It'll have the links to a lot of different resources and whatnot. And I do have a podcast that I've got a couple podcasts. The Jeff Heggie Show is where a lot of I don't share all my expert interviews on the podcast. Some of them are strictly just in the Confident Athlete program, but you can get some of them there. And then Jeff Heggie Daily Success Strategies. Well, I've got 800 there that you can go listen to. So you can go listen to those podcasts, and I share daily information. But social media wise, I'm on everything, but most active on Instagram, and that's Jeff Heggie Coaching. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jeff. I got a ton of notes, and I'm excited for our partnership, and hopefully, those parents, athletes that are listening, really give this some great consideration, because it's another level that you can unlock in your game. And just one thing, before we close this out, just in life right now, I'm working so much on my mindset and, controlling my thoughts that really, have to do with coaching, but just outside of coaching, that I find, a lot of what these topics are really help me in my day-to-day personal life. So even if it just helps them in the classroom or with friends, those are little bits of impact that can really make a difference. So thank you so much for your time today, Jeff.
Absolutely. And you know what, you said it perfectly earlier. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me just taking a little bit more here.
Yeah, keep going. Let's go.
You just were talking about, when they move on to the other things. And one of the things you got to remember is, in the moment, for a lot of these kids, whether it's high school volleyball, basketball, whatever it is, it's the most important thing to them right now. Maybe they'll never play after high school. Maybe they'll go on to play college, Division I, JUCO, whatever it might be. But this is a big time in their life, and you want to help them maximize it, because it's, I've got a nephew that lived with me, played high school football, that is now tight end for University of Arizona, and I've talked with him a lot about this, and the impact of helping an athlete become the best that they can is so impactful, and it's so important to them. During COVID, there is so much that basically we were told that's not important anymore. You know what? It was. These kids that had put years and years into becoming the best they could, and then all of a sudden their seasons were canceled. because, you know, it wasn't as important as everything else. It's not true. They deserved the recognition and the ability to play for everything they put into it. And I just think it's important to let these kids have that time to maximize their potential and be the best they can be, because it is going to impact who they become in the future.
Well said. I don't think I could have said it better, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, you know, all this wisdom. So thank you so much, Jeff.
Hey, thanks again. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.